Today, we're diving into one of the most significant and, let's be honest, most talked about chapters of the Quran. The fourth chapter, known as An-Nisa.
Right off the bat, the title The Women kind of makes you stop and think, doesn't it? I mean, what does a 1400-year-old text have to say about women? And is that even the whole story? Well, let's find out. Okay, so before we get into any of the details, we have to set the stage. With ancient texts, context isn't just important, it's everything. The name An-Nisa is literally just the Arabic for the women, and it gets that name for a pretty simple reason. A lot of its verses address issues related to women. But as we're about to see, that's just scratching the surface. And this context is absolutely fascinating. This chapter was revealed in Medina over a period of several years, right after the Battle of Uhud. Now, this was a major, devastating conflict, and it left the brand new Muslim community with a huge number of widows and orphans. That historical moment is totally crucial for understanding what this chapter is trying to do. So even though the title is The Women, if you think of this chapter as being only about women, you're kind of missing the main point. Its scope is way, way bigger. In fact, a couple of scholars, Roya Bigana and Ahmad Shafal Mehar, they put it perfectly. They said the major theme here is legislation. So think of it less like an essay on one topic and more like a blueprint for building a new society. And you can see that blueprint right here. I mean, the chapter lays out these incredibly detailed rules on pretty much everything. You've got family law, stuff like inheritance, marriage, and really radical new rights for female orphans. You've got social conduct, theology. It even touches on Jesus' role as a prophet. It talks about war, how to deal with hypocrites, how to settle disputes. It was designed to give structure to a community that was facing just immense challenges. Now, in all of its 176 verses, there is one that stands out. It is, without a doubt, the most discussed, the most debated, and the most controversial. So let's zoom in on verse 434. So the verse kicks off by saying that men are the protectors and maintainers of women, and it directly links this role to their financial support. Then it lays out this sequence of actions, a 3-step process for a husband to use if he fears ill conduct from his wife. And this is where the debate just explodes. Take a look at how different translators handle that final step. You've got Abdullah Yusuf Ali back in 1934 using strike them. Muhammad Abdel Halim in 2004 uses hit them. But then a more recent one from Mustafa Khattab translates it as discipline them gently. I mean, the choice of just one word completely changes the entire meaning. So this sequence is the crucial part. First step, verbal counsel. You admonish them. If that doesn't work, second step, physical distance. You separate in bed. And only if that fails do you go to the third step, which is captured in this single Arabic word, idribuhuna. The whole argument really hinges on what that word and a couple of others actually mean. The first piece of this puzzle is the word qawaman. This describes the man's role. It gets translated as protectors, maintainers, or in charge of. But, and this is so important, the verse itself explicitly ties this status to the man's financial obligations. It's not about some inherent superiority, it's conditional. Okay, the second piece of the puzzle is nushuz. This is that ill conduct that sets off the whole 3-step response. And again, the translations are all over the map. It could mean disloyalty or rebellion, or it could mean something more like high-handedness or just disrupting the marriage. And that brings us to the final, and let's be honest, the most explosive piece of the puzzle, idribuhunna. The root verb, daraba, is famously complex. Now, while it is very often translated as to strike or to beat, some interpreters argue that it can also mean things like to separate or to go away from, which, as you can imagine, leads to completely different ideas about what this final step really is. So with all that complexity, how have people actually made sense of this verse over the centuries? Well, the interpretations aren't monolithic at all. They really exist on a very wide spectrum. For many people, the most foundational piece of evidence is this statement from the Prophet Muhammad's wife, Aisha. She reported that he never struck a servant or a woman. Ever. And for those who argue against any physical interpretation of the verse, his own personal example is pretty central to their case. The modern scholar Jonathan A.C. Brown sums up the view of a lot of jurists throughout history pretty well.
He notes that even if you could read the verse as permitting striking, the Prophet's own example and his other teachings led many scholars to classify the act as strongly disliked or even, as he says, verging on prohibited. And even among the traditional scholars who did permit some kind of physical action, they immediately added a bunch of very strict conditions. They insisted it had to be light, more symbolic. Some even suggested using a siwak, which is a small twig like a toothbrush. And they said it must never, ever be on the face or leave any marks. The whole point was supposed to be corrective, not punitive. It's also really important to place this whole conversation in a wider context. These narratives, they don't exist in a vacuum. Figures in the Quran, like Maryam, Hajar, and Eve, are part of a much bigger Abrahamic tradition. They're often in dialogue with stories you'd find in the Bible, which of course has shaped ideas about gender across so many cultures for millennia. So what does all of this mean? When you boil it all down, what are the most important things to take away from our look at this incredibly complex chapter? Well, first, An-Nisa is so much more than a chapter about women. It's a legal blueprint for an entire society. Second, that historical context is key. The fact that it was revealed to deal with the fallout of a major battle, especially all the new orphans, explains so much. Third, verse 434 is just a masterclass in how an entire ethical debate can pivot on the translation of a single word. And finally, remember that this isn't just some dusty, ancient debate. It's a living conversation that's happening right now between traditional scholars, feminists, and modern thinkers. Which leaves us with a really big final question, one that goes way beyond this one chapter. For any foundational text, religious or not, that continues to influence law, culture, and family life thousands of years later, how do we navigate its complexities in a way that's both faithful to its origins and still relevant to the world we live in today?